Hi everyone, my name is Kirsty Fife. I'm currently working as lecturer in digital information and curatorial practice in the iSchool at Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK. So my presentation today is an anecdotal account, a reflective account of my experience supporting grassroots communities in developing web archiving skills. I should say thank you for the invitation to speak today, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussions that we'll have, no doubt, on the day itself. I should also preface the presentation by saying that I wouldn't consider myself an expert in web archiving. I'm a researcher with a background as an archivist. My web archiving skill set is something I've developed fairly recently in the last few years, and I've developed this in order to respond to the needs of communities that I have been working with in a recent research project. So I'm hoping this presentation will provide a useful account and encourage any other professionals out there to do similar types of work within their own settings. Just to give you some background to how this project came about, so I have just finished my PhD in information studies at UCL, and this research explored how DIY music spaces engage with documenting and archiving their histories. So obviously this is a web archiving conference and not a music conference, but just for the sake of definition, DIY music spaces are grassroots cultural venues that allow music communities to congregate. So I worked with a series of currently active punk spaces in the UK to investigate issues they encountered with record keeping and archiving, and as a result of doing this work, I identified a cluster of issues that related specifically to digital information. Communities found that information was becoming inaccessible at a rapid pace. There were issues around reliable long-term hosting of information, materials being deleted due to, for instance, algorithmic moderation processes on social media platforms, and the rapidly changing nature of both web content and music communities, in which there's a lot of turnover of individuals, meant that information was disappearing rapidly, and there was certainly a sense of helplessness displayed amongst the participants that I spoke to. And community members also felt that they had they felt helpless because they did not know how to respond. They didn't know how to protect that information. They didn't know how to start with archiving web content. So there was a fundamental lack of knowledge and skills, which meant that people felt unable to respond. Obviously, there is existing training within the field of web archiving in the UK. However, in this context, there were significant barriers that effectively meant that people either weren't aware that training existed, or they were intimidated by the assumed knowledge that might be expected of attendees. Or they were unable to attend events because they cost hundreds of pounds, including events that were, for example, specifically marketed at community archives in the UK. So this meant that there were a number of intersecting barriers that meant that, effectively the knowledge about web archiving skills, web archiving workflows, was not being translated into community spaces and settings. So my response was to use the space of my PhD, which was action-led in nature, to create training that could respond to this need, and to see what the take-up was like of it. So I chose to coordinate a series of online workshops. These were delivered in summer and autumn 2020, and I designed these to disseminate skills and knowledge that I'd gained in my previous professional practice. These were delivered online via Zoom, so the rapid pivot to online facilitation and online events in the pandemic meant that I could forego the traditional expenses associated with in-person training, like room hire, provision of lunches, coffees, teas, etc. And therefore this was something that I could get going quite quickly without having to, for instance, put in a funding application. So I chose to develop a 2-hour-long workshop, and that I made the decision that this would be available on a sliding scale donation basis. So participants were able to choose a donation between £0 and £10 to pay to attend this 2-hour-long workshop. The higher end of that bracket was suggested for instance, attendees who could be funded to attend by their workplace. So if there was, or if they had the means to contribute the money independently, and there were no qualifying criteria for a free place, so it was down to participants to select effectively which category, which level of donation would be appropriate for them. And because, as I said, a lot of the traditional expenses were removed, it was just expenses like a Zoom membership, captioning, expenses associated with online events that were associated with this series. So this is the format of the workshops. They were generally pitched as a complete basic introduction to web archiving. I made it very explicit that there was no requirement to have any background in archive work at all. I used and placed emphasis on accessible language, so I tried to avoid using jargon, and if I did use any technical terms, I tried to explain them as I introduced them. The workshop included some presentations, so a brief introduction to web archiving, and signposting of existing schemes and projects in a UK context. And then there were a number of group discussions and space to ask questions, which were peppered throughout the workshop, and this enabled attendees to make connections with each other as well as share their experiences with me. And finally, there was a demo of an open source web archiving tool. In this case, I chose Conifer, and I chose to focus on just one tool, so that people had some practical knowledge, something that they could get going with, and they weren't overwhelmed. I also recorded the presentations and the demo, and supplied copies of those afterwards to attendees so that they could review it as they, for instance, had a go themselves. The workshops were very successful. I initially programmed 4 workshops that sold out almost immediately, and in the end I delivered 7 iterations which were attended by over 140 people. There was attendance from activist groups across the world, which was certainly very exciting for me. It definitely succeeded in getting out there into much wider networks than I had originally anticipated when I put the event together. Interestingly, attendees also included information sector workers who described their choice to attend as informed by a lack of affordable training in web archiving. And the sliding scale donation worked as a strategy. So I was able to make tickets available from £0 to £10, cover all of the required expenses, and make sure that the labour of facilitation was fairly compensated as well. So it was a successful strategy to employ. So this is what I learned from this project. I was really surprised by the combination, the audience that attended these events, particularly that this knowledge set was as much desired by information sector workers as by activists and community groups. It made me realise that there are a lot of issues that come from existing training not being widely available or affordable, especially for new professionals. Without access to affordable training to build the digital skill sets that strategy stresses we need to build, we will obviously struggle to support community and grassroots heritage initiatives to manage and engage with their own web heritage as well. So this is certainly something that needs to change, and capacity to do this work needs to be built within the sector. This for me was a successful experience because of the capacity that online formats provided, so the ability to reduce costs and to create a workshop which could respond at an appropriate moment to a set of issues. Obviously, online formats have limitations, and those are also important and crucial to consider, but it certainly helped me to get going quickly in this case. And marketing was certainly a success, so making the deliberate decision to advertise this outside of information sector networks helped me to reach a different audience to traditional training events, and it engaged as a result a more diverse group of attendees. I'm thinking about how to take this forward and develop it into a larger scheme of work at the minute. Do get in touch if you are an archive organisation, for example, with similar interests, because I'm developing this effectively into a larger project and looking to work with sector organisations. So do get in touch. I'm also looking into developing this into a more staged program, which goes beyond the basics and introduces more tools and tips for managing workflows, for example. And I've also been exploring different types of online events that can be coordinated and make use of online spaces to encourage the sharing of skills and knowledge, specifically within grassroots communities in the area of information. So I hope this presentation has demonstrated that by considering how events are run, by thinking about the method of delivery, the pricing of training, the choice of facilitators and the way events are marketed, we can create independent, affordable, accessible formats of training that work for grassroots communities. And these spaces can create support networks, they can create important connections, and I hope that they can potentially transform or empower communities to think about their web archive, their web heritage in the future. So thank you for listening. And I've just on this slide included my Twitter handle and my email address. Do get in touch if you're doing similar work, and otherwise I'll look forward to questions in a few weeks' time. Thank you.